All right. Welcome to the 8th in a series of virtual readings featuring CavanKerry writers. We are so glad to have you. You're in for a Thursday evening treat as our poets for the night are Frannie Lindsay and Margo Taft Stever. As for me, I'm Gabriel Cleveland, the managing editor for CavanKerry Press, and I'll be your host for this evening, doing my best to fill in for the dynamic Dimitri Reyes while his jaw heals, presumably from overexertion with all the events he's been running lately. It's my pleasure to introduce newcomers to the press. As a non-for-profit literary press serving art and community, CavanKerry is committed to expanding the reach of poetry and other fine literature to a general readership by publishing works that explore the emotional and psychological landscapes of everyday life, and to bringing that art to the underserved where they live, work, and receive services. You can learn more about the press on our website and social media platforms, which Elena will be linking in the chat. We invite each of you to join the newsletter to stay up to date on our events so we can see you at the next one as well. For attending this reading, you're also welcome to pick up a copy of both Cracked Piano and The Snow's Wife on our website. And if you buy both of them between now and Sunday, you can use the coupon code PIANOSNOW for 20% off your purchase. So throughout the reading, we'd love to hear which lines jump out at you among the cornucopia of poems you're about to experience. Margo and Frannie will be answering your burning questions after the reading as well. So be sure to drop those in the chat box and I will do my very best to get to each of them. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Margo Taft Stever. Margo Taft Stever's poetry collections include The Lunatic Ball, The Hudson Line, Frozen Spring, and Reading the Night Sky. She co-authored with her son, James Taft Stever, Looking East, William Howard Taft, and the 1905 US diplomatic mission to China. Her poems, essays, and reviews have appeared widely in magazines and anthologies. She's the founder of the Hudson Valley Writers Center and founding member and current co-editor of Slappering Hall Press. In 2019, CavanKerry Press published Margo Taft Stever's Cracked Piano, and Cattywampus Press published her chapbook, Ghost Moose. She has had numerous interviews and readings in the past year as well, which you can find at her website, margotaftstever.com, when you're hankering for more. And she has just joined Case Western Reserve University as an assistant professor teaching poetry and bioethics. Please give a warm, albeit muted, welcome to Margo.
Thank you. I want to thank the CavanKerry Press team for publishing Cracked Piano and also for allowing me to read in this reading series. And I wanted to thank Frannie Lindsay for sharing her book launch for her beautiful book, The Snow's Wife. And thanks to everyone for attending. Also, I want to thank Baron Wormser, who I didn't realize was here, for helping to edit this book. He's a wonderful editor. My great-grandfather, Peter Rawson Taft, was briefly institutionalized in the Cincinnati Private Hospital for the Insane. Because of the scourge of such hospitalization, he became a disappeared person. Peter once attended a lunatic ball, which he mentions in one of his letters. Poems about him and the familial ramifications of his disappearance form a thematic core of Cracked Piano. In the latter half of the 19th century, as part of a humanistic movement in the treatment of mental patients, hospital superintendents sometimes held balls for their patients. Spectators were also sometimes invited. I'll read the poem titled The Lunatic Ball After Dance in a Madhouse by George Bellows. Furious dancing gives way to screams. 5 men stare ghoulish at the wall. This is the lunatic ball. The best student Yale had ever seen. 3 months after graduation, typhoid, brain swelled inside his skull. They dosed out calomel. 5 ghosts appeared in a mercury dream, headaches unbearable. This is a lunatic ball. Married 1 year, baby the next, his wife filed for release. The medical textbooks he gleaned, futile, endless stall. A woman names her baby doll Christ, lurches, leans, a building in an earthquake, then she crawls. This is a lunatic ball. One man plays a flute, calls himself Faunus. Another uses an invisible latrine. Attendants haul out a wild man in a straitjacket on a wooden beam. A woman growls like a bear. This is a lunatic ball. Behind a glass wall, well-dressed spectators riveted sit amused. Looking at them, the patients know they are through. Spectacled men sport greatcoats and laced up women make jokes in the shimmering hall. The next poem that I'll read is a title poem. And it's one of several found poems created from letters written either by Peter or by the hospital superintendent. Cracked Piano, Cincinnati Sanitarium, Private Hospital for the Insane, April 2nd, 1878. Dear Father, I am alone this evening as every, alone. An artist of imperfect mind is endeavoring to extract harmonious discords out of a cracked piano just at my left. Life here is of the plainest, I might say, of the hardest kind. Last Sunday, Mr. and Mrs. John Whetstone came to this institution to see her brother, but Mrs. W. spent some time on this floor. She stayed all night of Sunday and until noon Monday. Her visit was a godsend to me. Tell Tilly that I've enjoyed the fruit and preserves. Tell Tilly that it hurts me to write her, but if she will come and see me, it will do me more good than anything that could happen. My foot is sore and needs a healing application. Each patient has a separate room with a carpet, a bed, a table, a washstand, a box, and one chair, but no gas and no candles. There are two tables, one for the same portion of this community, the one table for the patients, the other for the attendants. At the head of the patient's table sits Colonel Passot, who is never guilty of two consecutive ideas. He is moreover quite dirty. On his right side sits your son. On Colonel Passot's left resides Mr. Williams, who cannot articulate so as to make himself understood. He consists principally of hair. Next to him sits his special attendant, Mr. O'Brien, and on the right side of your son rests a small German, the Duke, with whiskers and eyeglasses. He is constantly saying things that strike him as witty, and he laughs. He is a good deal of a fool. On the table further down sits Mr. McNeil, the tormentor of the piano, and a Mr. Gillespie, who has been here for about a year. He is going away in May. The latter has privileges to go out without attendant. Further on is a thick-faced individual who never speaks, and whom I will denominate as Mr. Blank. The conversation is neither amusing nor instructive. It is liberally interspersed with grunts by Mr. Williams, the man of hair, or hearty laughs by the young man from Illinois. But the bottom of the page is reached. A kiss to the baby, your affectionate son, Peter. One of my sisters and I designated a tree in a neighbor's field as a grandfather tree, referred to in this poem, which we actually worshiped during our childhood. Idiot's Guide to Counting. How do you become one with the horse, riding and becoming the act of riding, and the horse becoming the self and the other at exactly the same second, counting strides, counting muscle movement, counting fences, hurtling over them with the horse, counting the everything of one. How do you count? How do you pull a muscle turning over in bed at night? Measurements that change everything, counting back to everything, the everything of one, the pulled muscles of the back of one, the entanglement of one, the waves of particles counting back the quantum. How to become one with the branches of a tree, a grandfather tree in an apple orchard that no longer exists. Separate one from tree, horse, counting numbers, counting the grandfather tree to find the solution of one. Counting leaves, counting trees, leaves, counting everything as no longer existing, counting trees as one with the everything that no longer exists. I should mention that I actually wrote that poem in a workshop that I took with Karen Alanier, who was teaching a workshop on Gertrude Stein at the Hudson Valley Writers Center. So a stanza from the next poem was chosen for inscription on a sidewalk in my hometown of Sleepy Hollow, and I'll read the entire poem. Hudson line. The river stretches out like a line of flight, a pattern winging toward God. The river sucks oars down, it pulls toward depth, toward study of the undersoul. The river is constant. The frozen, forgotten earth no longer speaks a language. The dog barks next door at the clicking heels of the woman who makes her way to the station. Passengers stare at me on the train at Spuyten Duyvil, their metallic drift of perfumes, their attempts to read as I write this line. The river just stretches with the Tappan Zee Bridge into the green haze. No river can deny the existence of God, nor can trains travel backward with people shouting blindly out of windows. This is a little train of reason. People cough on trains. Something sticks like silkworms to the backs of their throats, and we who do not yet have coughs have no time for mercy. This is a train of thieves, all of us, who never cared for our jobs or our mothers, who looked out on the Hudson and saw only water. The mercurial role of mothers forms another thematic core of cracked piano. And my next poem is about a murder case in the state of New Hampshire. Splitting wood. It was the thought of his entering their infant's room that drove her. She remembered his face the first time she saw him, now half gone from whiskey, eyes hooded like a hawk's. He said he'd kill the children when he woke. The neighbors heard it, the screams they heard. His workman's hand, his gnarled hand dangled down. The knife lay by the bed. She slipped from the covers while he slept, placed her feet on the floorboards just so. The dogs barked outside, snapdragons, flowered tongues, and all the wired faces of the past strung up. The axe hung on the porch, wood pile nearby, each log plotted uneasily entwined. The children's tears were rain, tears were watering the parched hills. The wild moon foamed at the mouth, the wild moon crept softly at her feet. The arms that grabbed the axe were not her own, that hugged it to her heart while he slept were not hers, the cold blades sinking in his skin. She grew up in the country splitting wood. She knew just how much it took to bring a limb down. And I wanted to read an elegy that I wrote for my mother and for nature. My mother is dying. In the place where she belongs, suffering erases itself. Doves bring her seeds, horses sleep next to her in the straw. Where she belongs, a welcoming place holds her, keeps her from running away. The greenness of the hay turning to gold. Already the rain's restless trajectory. My mother is busy dying. She no longer knows my name. This is the wind of Eden, the wand of change, the last slave of silence, the knave of rain, So quiet the roving of each vacant quest. Let her be buried in the sea by the seaberry, the briar rock, the fossil chamber. Alone, blown, roadside stray, the flown, restless, wayward ringing, bells clang, ocean downcast rolls. Wandering once again, now I return to the center, searching the level earth, calling her name, remembering that I am lost. The path unfurls before my dog and me, walking to the rocks, the ocean on one side, the bay on the other, eiders blessing the waves. The seagull's spontaneous burst, how it hurts with the radio blaring. My mother is dying, gone from a body that has abandoned her. Cry because everything goes haywire, because this is Apollo's siren lyre, the field-worn answer, the childless response, children waiting for some God to bring them home. And I'll read one more mother-related poem. Bottomland. Evening tidings, the preparations, each nestle, each cheep like chicks calling, the winnowing anomie, all come to call too late, come to call for sleep. How a mother can change from angel to sour mud queen of all decay, by those who feel the sting, by those who cry out. Flail my heart upon the stone in the grove near the riverbank, rushing water to the river break. Even the known becomes unknowable. Their small eyes look at me like chicks gathered against rain, staved. Thin rivulets of fear, running away with itself, fear, fearful fear. No one can talk to you. No one can listen. No one can touch you. This is not stillness. This is not the keeper of the estuary of the deep. Don't forget me. Don't forget that hill the horses cantered you down to the bottomland. From this stone, ageless heart, remember your mother, a mother who loved her children. My last poem I'll read from an unpublished manuscript, Three Ravens Watch, and a number of the poems are about the sixth extinction, which we know is one of the greatest and the only mass extinction created by humans. Several years ago, the subtext of this poem would have seemed far-fetched. End of horses. I write to you from the end of the time zone. You must realize that nothing survived after the horses were slaughtered. We sleep below the hollow, burned out stars. We look beyond dust bowls, searching for horses. When you walk in the country, you will be shocked to meet substantial masses on the road. We do not know whom to blame or where the horses were driven, who slaughtered them, or for what purpose. Had the horses slept under the linden trees, the generals and engineers pucker and snore on the veranda. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Margot. Before we go into the second half of the reading, we hope you're enjoying what you've heard so far. And I'd like to remind you to put in some questions for Frannie and Margot for our Q&A session, which will come immediately after Frannie is completed with her reading. Also, of course, can't go too long without reminding you that you can pick up both Cracked Piano and The Snow's Wife for 20% off at our website using the coupon code PianoSnow between now and Sunday. As a nonprofit, every book sold helps us continue and grow our mission to serve the community. Now back to the reading. So I'm going to introduce Frannie. Frannie Lindsay's previous volumes are If Mercy, from the Word Works 2016, Our Vanishing from Red Hen Press 2014, May Weed, the Word Works 2010, Lamb, Perugia 2006, and Where She Always Was Utah State University Press, 2004. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, the American Poetry Review, the Yale Review, Field, Plume, Salamander, and the Best American Poetry 2014. She was awarded the 2008 Missouri Review Prize. She has held fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts and the Massachusetts Cultural Council. She teaches poetry workshops specializing in grief and trauma. She is also a classical pianist. Her sixth book, The Snow's Wife, came out 2 days ago, so it's hot off the presses. I hope you all join me in welcoming Frannie.
Hi, everybody. What a great honor and pleasure to be here. And I see that Baron Wormser is in the audience, and I want to thank him so much for his fastidious edits on this manuscript. I was really floored by some of the wonderful things that he recommended and made the poem sparkle. And Margot, it's a real honor to read with you. And Gabe and Dimitri, thanks so much for your patience and creativity and forbearance while this book came into the world. So I want to say a little bit about this book before I get started. The Snow's Wife treats the topic of grief, but I don't think of these poems as personal. I don't think of them as personally sad. I've had a number of people read them and say, was that cathartic for you? And I want to say, actually it was not. My answer instead is more, well, no. The cleansing or the catharsis happened long before the poems found their way onto paper. I think there's a certain amount of that a writer has to get out of the way so that you can examine something through an objective lens. And that's what I wanted these poems to do. They are in memory of my late husband and his last several months before he died of cancer. Falcon. Your body lay alone with its readiness. We shared our bright, harsh peace with the air of the porch, the sun, a gentle stranger. The squirrel you once shooed from the feeder snatched a white crust of your sourdough. We laid our palms down in your sternum's precipice. We rested our hands in your silent white hair, on your ears and your white, unfeeling fingers. We dried the tear that remained on your cheek. We opened the drapes. We opened the cupboards. There were your goblets, the rest of your whiskey, your pocked birthday spoon, clean tea towels folded asleep, and your bathrobe tall on its hallway hook. On the bedside table, water stood in its cup. Your thirst had stopped. The Christmas cactus put forth a blossom. Your King James Bible perched on its chestnut stand like a falcon, wings opened wide to Isaiah. Once I watched a female peregrine swoop on a field mouse. I watched some boys swoop on a muddy red frisbee. Their clean hair glistened. In the white chapel, an amateur choir fumbled an anthem's opening notes. The peregrine came to rest on a birch tree's scarred white arm. It shook with her sudden weight. Some dry leaves fluttered with afterlife. She came for her lonesome feast, her labor of snapping the still moist bones. In the harsh and bright noon's peace, she tore and ate. Bead. I still have the shirt he wore to the doctor the day she took both his hands and looked into his milky eyes and told him, as if it were some kind of blessing. None of us cried, none of that. Instead, we sat in an awkward huddle and skimmed the scan report, all 7 single-spaced pages, making no sense, especially to him who swore to God that a life was a string of beads made of single bright days, and all you needed to do to be happy was thread them, now and then hold your strand up to whatever light there was, but always keep a firm grip on the bead you were passing your red string through at that very moment. Then go back to your stringing and go back again until they were gone. This is a little bit of a snapshot from a dream sequence. Refuge. You didn't have your cane. The dark March wind made you weak. You only had a little way to go. You leaned against a stucco wall I saw once in your travel books. You wanted aspirin. Your scarf was much too tight. Your hat gone. Something more was wrong. You'd lost your wedding ring. I brought a cup of water and 2 pills. I brought them through the snow. I brought a cap that didn't fit. You should have been deep in your shadow's boat, a little bit asleep, a reed between your teeth. The snow, had it been kind, would fall again like old magnolia petals, loosening all at once when it was time, and go on falling, burying your boot tracks. Elegy against itself. Hated the winter mornings, sunless as bedpans, hated the unsugared tea of nightfall in January, hated the bedside evenings, the orchid pink morphine lined up in its syringes like nervous girls at a dance, hated reading aloud, hated my voice, but the words forward marched day by dry-mouthed day, hated the lamp kept on and your lit sleep, hated the non-refundable season tickets, the memberships, the bursting compost, the fruit flies, dog paddling in dishwater, Margaret's vacuum cleaner, it's every Thursday, no matter whatness. Now I box up the soapstone peppermill, wrap the owl collection in undershirts, press orange dots on the paintings I want, make room on my shelves, leave your moccasins on the rocking chair I won't go near, a clean white sock rolled into each like a fist in a mouth. Golgotha. Then they came and cleansed you, my love, with a separate sponge for each arm, each hand, and its citizen fingers, each leg and each foot pale as magnolia, and swept a burst of holy wind through your hair for ease of travel. And then they anointed one of your kerchiefs with tap water and made new your chest and belly and blurred your sex. Then they gathered their competent shadows and turned you, muscled with tender indifference, your boulder of pain, onto a kinder place, and smoothed you and pressed upon your tongue a Eucharist of ice, and raised the blinds on the wild and sleeping day. This is the last in the sequence of the lead up until the death, and I'm going to read some that followed it. After. No one died in your bed. It is clean today as a plot of daylight. The sheets are new, the pillows nestled like well-nourished children. The packets of square blue swabs for your lips, the folded diapers, the delicate syringes. These were props. Someone prays as the wind grabs bone specks away from her palms. The wind has other blowing to do. Someone cries and the months don't care. Someone tends the plants and they bloom. As if informed, the mail stops. Then God appears as a story, or as the breeze where a story belongs. You died in your bed. We came. We held your face. Summer came too. We had to allow her in. This next poem is to my husband's daughter, who was just a rock in my life. Her name is Lizzie, and she just stood by me week in, week out, day in and day out. And I don't know how I would have been left standing if she were not there. This is called The Rapids of Upland Road. You are going to lose everything. The funeral home will show up to gather your father beneath a velvet shroud. The red potatoes will sprout in their basket inside the window. Someone will wash and fold the bedding and give it away. The neighbors' visits will stop. The art will assess, and then out of boxes. The plants will wither. No one will want the rare books. In time, your handwriting too will tie itself into mad tangles. You will never be granted the mercy you pled for. Your hoarse voice will startle you. But look, 2 brown rabbits have popped naively out from behind the lilacs. In their lovely, identical eyes rests the gem of everyday trust. It needs no faceting. Then the evening blinks, although it is nowhere near dark, and leaves you alone with just enough thanks to tear off one more rag. In November, everything departs. Behold the sunshine draping its already weary cloak over the noontime pond. Behold the peregrine's gaze, clear of rumor. Behold the brambled railroad track at the end of wander. Behold the black dog watchfully curled around the soup bone she's worried down to its lifeless gleam. Behold the plaid shroud of her blanket. I have been willing the finches to fall silent and join the sullen wet of the leaves, willing my friends to keep out of the way, stars to keep out of the way of the night clicking along its rainy avenue. But behold too the bosomy gloom of libraries, the lamps so earnest and adequate over the little desks. I can bear to look as happiness fades from its tedious season. I can endure each vesper bell tonguing against its brave lip, the thrill in words like reckon, atone, and widow, how they are one another's encrypted siblings, the things they know, the things they hearken. There's 3 more. Morning. But then there is always the square bed of sun that the east-facing window delivers in time for the dog to lie down basking beneath the piano and only herself. And there is the piano too, with its horse-like kind-heartedness, its sleek peace, and in the next room, which never has needed a door, the radio turned down low by the lamp and the freesia on the small dented table, speaking its terrible stories that sound at this volume like late summer insects signaling their million-year-old acceptance that this is the end of their lives. And there is always the woman who hasn't been raped in over 40 years, making her coffee, her oatmeal, making the home that no one can ever make for her. I had a long meeting with myself about whether or not to read this next poem, and I kind of thought, it may be disturbing to a lot of people, but if there's one person in the audience who takes it in and can somehow hold it in a way that matters, then I kind of think I will have done my job. So I'm going to read it. Prayer for my rapist. I hope he has learned to slink unnoticed across the night's sad meadows, leaving the asters alone in their clusters, evading the blackberry's thorns. So much running. From pillow slam, scream and I'll kill you, knife in the sock, from bureau shoved in front of bathroom door, from 7 streaked Polaroids. He has a silky scar on the left, just under one eye. He is short. His hair is lush as a puppy's. Touching him saves my life. Remembering him saves my life. Crouch him in any dark. Deprive him of fingerprints. I will always be wide awake, although he is old, a little less mad, cleaned up. Something about the things that a stare can't freeze. The squalid rattle deep in the ribs. It is only a cough. It is only a trapped wolf's fury. It is the sum of his father's despair, no more than that. He has no shirt. He has no coat. His shoes are torn. He is thirsty. His legs are weak. He clatters and trips. The soft grass offers him only the might of her pity. I think I will finish with a new poem that I wrote this summer. I just have this quirky little memory of childhood, and I'm finding out the more I poll my friends that a lot of us have this memory in common. It seems like a lot of little girls went through a phase before adolescence of wanting to be a horse. And so this poem is about that. It's called For a Child Longing to Be a Horse. How tragic to be without hooves, but the wind has its own permission to riffle your drowsing curls, the same way it riffles the quiet of manes and tails, the trampled hay and the scent of oversweet rotted apples. And instead of angels, two Appaloosas at home in their breath watch over your sleep as if through a paddock's sun-warped door. From your closet hook, your bandana and lanyard rustle. Tomorrow, as you button your dress before school, you will catch yourself whinnying a little. You will never again need a word for meadow. Thank you so much.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Frannie, and thank you again to both readers. A round of silent applause at the moment for both of them. And we'll jump right into the question and answer from the audience. Of course, feel free to keep dropping those questions in the chat and I'll get to as many as I can. So this first one, we'll start off with a quick one, maybe, but it may be a long answer. From Carolyn Roy Bornstein, she asks to both of you, how does a poem start for each of you? What comes first?
Sometimes the middle comes first. And I'll say more. Margo, what do you think?
Well, I would say there's no clear answer to the question because I feel that poems come in different ways. Sometimes a poem will take 40 years to write. Sometimes less frequently for me, I will sit down and write a poem in one sitting. That doesn't happen very often. Usually it takes a lot of revision, but every once in a while I can write a poem in one sitting, but there are definitely poems that I've written that have taken 40 years to complete. Well, I don't know if they're ever complete, but to feel that they're in some way finished.
I think also what I mean by sometimes the poem starts in the middle of itself is you sort of have to, I sometimes find that I have to kind of wade my way in, and once I'm in kind of up to my knees, I discover what it is that I'm really writing about. And those first 7 or 8 lines just fall away.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I know personally for me, sometimes I'll be walking down the street or something, an image will just pop out at me from the world around, and it'll form in my head as a poetic description, and I say, oh, you know, that might be something, and if it sticks around, then I know it is. Or if something just shouts out in my head, the same kind of approach. So there is no one clear answer for that, of course, but thank you for your insight as to how some of those poems get started.
I know exactly what you mean by that sudden image that just sort of comes crashing into your head. It's great.
Yeah, and it's like before it happened, you would have never described it that way, and suddenly that's the only way you can describe it. And
Yeah.
then I'm onto something. So, speaking of lines in poetry, Elena had a question. She said she's always wondered what was meant by the phrase "remembering him saves my life" in "Prayer for My Rapist."
Wow. I think that has a lot of meanings, but the most essential one is that remembering a trauma, I think, gives it a context, and it no longer has to loom as sort of this great miasma in your life. It's a very specific thing, and you can put it away.
Hopefully that's a sufficient answer for Elena. I think that that's spot on. I mean, nailing it down or placing it in some way, defining it, certainly helps for a lot of trauma. So I posted that in the chat window as well. So continuing on the subject of lines in poetry, this is for both Frannie and Margot. And I don't know if you've had the chance to scroll through the chat at all, but if not, you can answer more generally. Benjamin Bagocius asks, he says, I would love to hear what each poet thinks of the lines that made their way into the chat. Are the poets surprised by any particular lines that stood out to the listeners? Would each writer be willing to pick 1 or 2 lines from chat and respond to that line, maybe sharing what that line means to them?
I'm going to have to jump and go into the chat. All you will see is my fingertips.
That's all right. And again, you can also answer more generally in terms of lines that people have talked to you about in the past as well. So.
And I can't get down any further in the chat, so sorry.
That's all right. We have things like the lamps so earnest and adequate. I've been waiting for the finches to fall silent. You have a slightly incredulous, no one will want the rare books from Miranda Beeson. Some of those words popped out. Then earlier, big one was a clean white sock rolled into each like a fist in a mouth.
Well, you know, when I saw those socks and that pair of moccasins, I thought, those look exactly like what I said they looked like in the poem. And from there, I just sort of worked backwards about how difficult the process of caregiving is and how angry you don't want to be but are. It just sort of, the poem sort of wrote itself backwards.
That's a great way of putting it. Margot, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see any lines, but a couple we have here with the everything that no longer exists.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah, I think that line is for me about a lot of things, but especially about the fragility of existence, of human life, and of, you know, what exists and what no longer exists. That's what it means for me.
Great. So hopefully that's a good starting point for some of those lines that jump out to people. Going to move forward with a question for Margo, starting with a statement and then moving into a question. I think it's an act of great generosity to capture the perspective of someone who's enduring a struggle that differs so widely from one's own. And you render the experiences of Peter with such grace and pathos. You truly do a service to his memory. And I was wondering if you could talk about the challenge of doing justice to someone else's experience and how important it is to speak up for those who are no longer around to speak for themselves.
Well, I guess what really captivated me about Peter's life was that he was so lost to our family. And I mean, I grew up not knowing anything about him. No one ever, my mother only mentioned once that he was the first American to get a divorce. You know, whereas William Howard Taft, his half-brother, was a president of the United States. And of course, he wasn't the first American to get a divorce. That was not even true. But that was the only thing I ever heard it mentioned about him. So just to understand the impact of his disappearance, nobody talked about him. And I guess just then when I was doing research for this book on the 1905 US mission to Asia, I ran into these letters by him, and I just became I fell in love with him because he was such an interesting person, and he had so many amazing observations. He was the best student at Yale, graduated to that date. It was in the newspaper. He was very bright, but because he was hospitalized, and it was such a scourge at that time to be in a mental hospital, he just had to be written out of existence. And for me, that just had such a huge kind of impact. And I guess I'm really fascinated about families in the past and trying to understand what happened, because so much of it is buried by 2 generations. You can't find anything very much out. I was lucky that William Howard Taft papers exist because all these family letters are there, which enabled me to read these letters, which are just unbelievable. But I mean, parts of my family are totally lost, and I think it's just so interesting to see what happens to human beings.
And so important not to forget.
Yeah.
Thank you again for that. I'm gonna move forward to a question for Frannie. And this is sort of a continuation of a question that I had last time, and you spoke to it a little bit before you got started. But I was wondering if you could speak to the process of getting to a point where you can view and write about your own experiences dispassionately. I think the reason I keep coming back to this question is that it's a time of great pain in our country, and your collection details a time of great pain in your life, but it does so without any wallowing. You stand on your own 2 feet. As you said last time, the tissues are for the audience, not the reader. Do you have to write through all those emotions until you get to a point where you can write untethered by them? Is it just a process of healing over time?
I think you do have to write past the feelings, even in this terrible time that we're all living through together. I don't write about the pandemic. I don't write about global warming, or I just can't write about the world right now. I hope at some point something quiet will come of that. I know that, I mean, the only real cataclysm in my life that registered for me was 9/11. And I had not written for years. And a little while after 9/11, I sat down and I wrote these little tiny, quiet poems. And I thought, gee, that's really interesting. And they were not thundering pieces, they were just quiet. And they weren't any good, but I just kept going. Um, and I kind of snuck under this mass of grief and fear and mourning, and sort of looked around and said, okay, what's in this little, room that I'm creating for myself under all this rubble? And I think that's kind of what I did in this book. And if I ever do get to where I can write about the things we are living through right now, it'll be through that.
Thank you so much for that great answer. And I think that also spoke to a question that Cindy had as well, asking about how much time from an experience do you need to, before you can really begin to write about it? And I'm sure the answer varies from person to person, from grief to grief. Some things come quicker than you expect, and some take far longer than you would like to get to that point.
Here's an interesting spin I could put on that. Yes, the time varies widely and you really can't quantify it, but if it's a grief or a loss that with which you are somewhat familiar, say the loss of one of your parents and then the other one dies, you sort of know the language and the terrain of that grief. Probably. I mean, that's maybe for some people that's a poor example, but sometimes there are losses and they're familiar to you. You just you've been here before. And so you have that sort of body of knowledge. And many times you don't. And even if sometimes if there's a loss that has a great deal in common with another one, it is still a really foreign planet. I mean, it's just way different. So it's hard to discern them.
Certainly. So thank you again for that. We're running short on time, so I'm going to go to the next question for both of you, but we'll start with Margot. This one's from Jonathan. How do you two experienced poets create a book, not just a poem, but a manuscript? And when do you know it's done and needs no more poems or work?
Goodness.
And it might be a good thing that Walt Whitman's not here to chime in.
Well, that's a difficult question to address. I think in some cases it's different than other cases. For instance, when I put together my first book, I had been working on it for so many years that it was, I just had so many poems to choose from, and it just kind of went together in a kind of thematic way. The second book for me was pretty much centered on the familial disruption of what happened in our family with Peter, and the sort of echoing of that through different generations. And then the book that I've most recently have worked on is about, pretty much a lot of it is about this environmental issues and sixth extinction, more eco-poetry oriented. So it has to do with my own focus in my own life. And that's how the poems get organized, because they're the poems that I'm writing at that time. And it's what's sort of driving me to understand the world at that, So that's sort of what it is.
So you get to a point where you feel like your collection of poems sort of looks at the whole experience from every angle and does a good job in investigating each one.
Well, yeah, I hope so. And, obviously I continue to work on any collection until it's published, but yeah.
Of course, yeah. And I would certainly say you achieved that in Cracked Piano. I haven't read your other books yet, but
Mhm.
I'm sure you do there as well.
Yeah.
Anything to add on that one, Franny?
Well, each time I finish a book, I think, first of all, I think, that's it. I'm never going to write another book again. That's all I got in me. And then I start throwing random lousy poems into a notebook, and then I'll throw in 2 or 3 that don't seem quite so lousy. And once I've got 15 poems that aren't too lousy, I'll say, And that's all I'll say is, And then I'll just sort of throw out the bad ones and keep the 15 and let them sort of build up a little bit and say, I think this might at least be a chapbook. And so I'll let them grow in a little bit, let them grow some more, and I'll do another weeding, and I'll keep doing weedings until I have about maybe 50 pages. And then I'll start looking to see what shape it is and what the arc of it is and what it wants to be about. And it'll turn into something. And the way I know a manuscript is done is when an editor sends me an email saying, I need all of your final changes by January 2nd at 9 o'clock.
Hmm.
And after that, we can't take any more. Um,
So thank you, Baron.
One of my books, I was literally up until 4 in the morning. The deadline for final changes was 9 that same morning, and I was just sweating. I was just really, really sweating, and I was crossing out lines and changing words. And I think the publisher must have really rolled their eyes at the ceiling, but
I mean, you get one shot once it's
get
once
one
it's
shot.
out the door. Yeah, that's a different story. So I think even if someone's rolling their eyes, in the back of their mind, they know, they get it. We all get it. It's a huge process. It's a huge thing to ask, to let it out into the world. And fortunately for all of our readers, you have let it out into the world. And as we mentioned earlier, we're so glad to have had the privilege of publishing both of these books. As I mentioned earlier, we have a discount on those going on until Sunday. Dimitri or Elena will post some of that information in the chat window. As I mentioned, we're gonna round things out pretty shortly, but Franny, you mentioned that writing these poems wasn't cathartic for you, but this question is for both of the authors here. This is from Carolyn Roy Bornstein again. She asks, does writing give you some agency? Does controlling the narrative impart any sense of control over something that isn't truly controllable?
I think that in my experience, it definitely can do that. I think that for my first book, I was still struggling with my father's death. And I think that writing really helped me deal with that, and just by looking at it in so many different ways. And I think it can actually, yes, definitely. Writing can help with understanding the world for sure.
For me, one of the ways I rein in poetry that's kind of difficult to rein in is with sound and rhythm. If I've got some structure around it, not strict structure that I have to follow, but something that sort of pushes and pulls it into a shape, or not this shape, but that shape, that helps guide me.
Yeah, because then you are forced not to just say whatever comes to mind. You have to come up with something that fits in that structure, and it makes you think that much harder about your choice of words, right?
Yeah.
Thanks. So I think we're just about to wrap up. I think we touched on all the questions, even if I didn't read exactly what every single person asked. I think we addressed all the questions. And so now it's my time to say one more time how grateful I am to be able to host this reading with the both of you, and to hear your words, to share them, has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe.
Thank you.
And for all those
That's
of you,
Richard.
for all those of you out there who are still listening, if you're not on our newsletter yet, you can sign up right on our website, CavanKerryPress.org. And certainly spread the words to all your poetry loving friends so we can see them at the next reading as well. So anything any other staff member has to add, now is a great time for it, or we'll start to wrap it up.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So we wish all of you the best, continuing health, safety, and sanity as we go
Yeah.
into the rest of October. And if any of you do order the books, I will look forward to shipping them out tomorrow. So.
Thanks so much.